So this episode of Passing is all about squishing these together or opening them. And if there are the only two things you remembered from this episode, you would be much better at passing. We're obviously going to go through different situations of preventing their attacks and making sure that you get to passing situations where you're chest on chest or 3/4 mount. But if you just thought about squishing these together or separating them, you'd be much better. We're going to go over that now.
I've been working with some passing stuff during the week that has a high degree of success, which is really, really good. That was a great sentence, wasn't it? Been playing with some stuff from Passing Reverse De La Riva that is negating a lot of their offense almost completely. There is a couple things they can do to start to off-balance you and start to move you around and threaten triangles and close guard and other bits and pieces, but we're going to cover shutting down all of that. So when we start to step into Reverse De La Riva from this situation, as we get them supine, usually what people start to do is they lead with their foot, and this is commonly a mistake because it gives him all of the access to start to put hooks in. He can start to knee lever me backwards. He can start to off balance me and start to give me a couple things to think about before I actually get in towards some passing. So before we do that, we're going to start to lead with our knee instead. We're not going to take our foot too far away. We're actually going to entice him to start to reach for it. And when he does reach for it, that's when we're going to start to throw our foot back and down so we can get access to this leg being stuck on the floor here. We're going to make a big effort to start to keep this pinned at all costs. Like I said beforehand, there's triangle threats and there's close guard threats. If we don't contain this leg and pin this leg to the floor, he's very easily able to move it, start to throw it to my far hip, and then we can start to deal with close guard. So what we're going to do is make sure our main focus when we drop this hip backwards from Reverse De La Riva is pin this down to the floor. Once I've pinned it down to the floor and I can access his top leg with the inside of my my armpit here, I'm going to start to lean all my weight over that direction and then throw my hip back further. I want my right hip all the way down, trying to touch his hips at this stage. Now this is pretty uncomfortable for Spewy here. I'm going to try and demonstrate this without just crushing you in the demonstration too much. But this is the position we want to be in. My head is over his far shoulder and my right hip is pointed down in such a fashion, I'm driving my weight off of my left foot so that he can't actually get a butterfly hook in at this stage, and he can't really utilize this knee all that well. He's got a couple of different options here. He can keep it pointed in towards my top shoulder, of which I'm just going to lay all over the top of him completely and just exhaust his hip flexor. I've got his heel pinned to his ass, which we know from body locking is really good. It stops him from being able to produce too much force. If I don't do this correctly and I leave my hip up in this direction, he can start to kick me away, put butterfly hooks in and give me some problems. So we're basically dealing with all the problems of this leg all at once, as well as dealing with all the problems of this leg all at once. I don't necessarily have to have this pinned on the floor, but as long as my left hand is separating his knee from his chest, try and go to close guard, try and go to K guard. It's very, very difficult. It's also based on the position of my left leg here. If my left leg was all the way down and back, this pummel becomes quite easy. So what I want you to think is that your left foot should be up near his shoulder line to some degree. And so if he tries to make that pummel, even if I do make the mistake of taking my left hand off, it's very, very difficult. Like Spewy is quite flexible and even he can't make it happen. Yeah, exactly right. He's gonna have to extend me, get me further away, then he can start to put that here. And so we're dealing with all of these at once by just weighing down over this far shoulder, over this far side hip. And so I'm going to give him a little bit of a reprieve now. The likelihood that he starts to drop his knee down towards a low knee shield is very, very high. Now what we want to avoid when that happens is that I take my chest pressure off the outside of his leg and I don't prevent him from being able to lock his feet together. If he locks his feet together, now we're doing an entirely different passing system because he's prevented me from moving by locking up my near side hip. So from this position that we get into when we're driving away to cross, we're going to let him think that going towards a Z-guard and locking his feet is a good idea. As he does, I'm just going to shift my hips down on top of his knees and crush them together. The main thing I want to be thinking about in all of this passing is whether I'm splitting his legs apart or crushing his knees together. And if you guys just focus on those two details, you'll have a lot more success in this position where we're like in split squat passing. Once I've squished his knees together, I'm in a really good spot. So we're just going to lay the foundations in the beginning I've got an opponent in a supine position. He goes to reach for reverse del Hiva. I start to slip that leg backwards. As I slip, I'm demonstrating this in parts, but I want you to do it all in one sequence. Don't like just collapse on your training partner. If you're in a match, this is completely fine. Just drive your hip straight to the floor, but obviously be nice to your training partner, especially while you guys aren't warm, and the compression of this knee to the butt could be quite damaging for the knee. So shift this backwards, and then our hip drops towards his center line. My left foot comes up towards his shoulder line, and I'm pushing my weight across this direction. I also want to make a point of keeping my hand on the top of his quad here. This will prevent him from being able to go to close guard and K guards and other associated things. The most likely reaction from him that I've been finding in this position is that he starts to turn in and face me, drop his knee, and try and lock his feet together. When he tries to lock his feet together and I drop my hip in this position, it's physically impossible. Try and lock your legs. His bottom leg is somewhere in between my legs, and his top leg doesn't have the ability to reach his bottom foot. And it's a really nice spot to be in. The entire time, I'm weighing over the top of him, I'm exhausting him. If he wants to try and open his top leg, he has to do it against my entire body weight, and the small muscle on the outside of your glute here is not that strong. Even against, if I was on the bottom position against Spewy, it would be extremely difficult for me to do that. So even with a massive weight discrepancy, it's just not going to happen. So get into this position when we're in reverse del Hiva. Shoot your leg back as they start to reach, and then drive your weight and your body weight over their far shoulder, making sure that you compress their heel to their butt and their knee towards their chest. Bring your left foot up to their shoulder line so it matches just directly here, and then keep your left hand ready to receive his knee so that he doesn't pull that knee to his chest. When he wants to exit this position, the first reaction he's probably going to give me is pointing his knee down towards my bottom hip, and it's as easy as just driving that hip into his knee so that it collapses down to the floor and we compress his knees together. And Spewy will tell you it's pretty uncomfortable under here, and he doesn't really have a lot of options. He certainly can't lock his feet and put me in a Z guard, and then we can start to use our passing system from there. So give that a go, find out how it feels, and then we'll start to upgrade with some passes. Is that knee sore? Should I get a more physically robust demonstrative dole?
Nah, I'm ready.
Okay, stop complaining. Anyway, so we get to this position, and what you guys would have realized is that there's a pretty decent degree of weight on this knee. They're not going to like this. They've got two options. They can either try and get this knee away from their chest underneath your armpit, or like we discussed, the first most likely option is they're going to think there's a Z guard available on this far side. We're just going to follow them down, and we're going to keep our weight situated over their top leg. We're going to try and maintain our head over their far shoulder as much as possible, because the lower down I get, this actually becomes less useful. He can start to frame me away at the upper body. Yeah, exactly. And he can start to hip escape, and I don't really have a good mechanism of control for him there. So when you do go down here, don't try and slide all the way down. Keep your weight of your right hip pressed where it was, but now his leg is in the way. So what that looks like, my hip is here at this moment. When he decides to put his knee down, I don't actually move my torso backwards. I keep my torso in the exact same position that it was. So what do we do from here? This is very useful at putting fatigue into your opponent, but it's not very useful for passing because we're not outside the legs. If I can start to walk his bottom leg to a position where his heel isn't pointed up towards my butt, I can always make a pummel with my left leg and start to staple this down to the ground. This frees up my hand now because my left leg's doing the job of my hand. It's stopping him from using this leg because it's stapled here on the floor. I can start to come far side of the head. I can go near side underhook. I can go cross face. It's going to depend on how he's framing up on me, of course. I'm not going to go straight into a bicep tie, and I'm not going to go try and execute this space while he's glued up nice and tight here. I recommend that if he's glued up nice and tight here, you start to come over the back and squish him in that direction. If he's not nice and tight there, you can always, of course, just go underneath the arm, or common favorite, if he doesn't put in a bicep tie, we can start to go into cross faces. Once we do this, we're going to start to bring our right knee over the top of that same leg that we pinned, and I want my leg, my right leg at this stage, to do the job of pinning his bottom leg now. What I'm going to do by doing that is drive my right knee all the way up into his bottom hip. So if he tries to bring his knee to his chest, my entire body weight is in the way. It's going to be extremely difficult. Now, the only thing stopping me from obtaining a pass is his left knee. The way that we deal with that, depending on which configuration we have at the upper body, really nice and simple. I'll just give you guys one option. Reach down for the front of his shin here with your bicep, and then you're going to hug his butt. As you hug his butt, you slowly, don't injure your training partner, widen your elbow towards the ceiling to get rid of that knee, and then you can start to walk down towards the top pin, towards his hips. If I don't walk down, he's just going to bring his knee back on the inside, so make sure that you're circling down in that direction. If you get to this position and he is doing a good job at pulling his heel towards your butt and you're not able to make that pummel, no matter how flexible you are, we're going to start to walk the opposite direction instead of walking up this way. So we've got two options here. I'm going to start to bring his knees long down the length of his body and try and straighten him out as much as possible by continuing to walk this direction. You'll notice that his left foot's still in play here, but it's the easiest thing in the world to start to come over the top of that knee and then continue to squish his knees together with my hips. When his knees are squished together like this, there's not a lot of options that he has. If he wants to open his legs, my entire body weight's over the top of his hip and it's going to be very difficult. Again, you're going to have the same options at the upper body here. I've already got my hand in the near side underhook position. If he was doing a good job at trying to win that inside battle, I can always start to go inside that and go to cross faces. I wouldn't go over the back here, but I could go near side underhook and cross face. Let's go cross face for the minute. From here, that I've maintained his knees being squished together, I'm going to slide my left knee up to the pocket of his hip, and then I can put my right knee down on the other side. He may claim a 3/4 mount at this stage, but that's not really a problem because we're essentially past the legs here, and passing 3/4 mount's quite easy. So, good boy. And this pummel's very easy and very achievable, so you're not really losing a whole lot by just playing with it and seeing if it's there. You don't actually have to look and see where his heel is. You just have to have a feel for it. So if I ever want to do this, I'll walk his leg away from his chest, towards his chest, away from his legs, and I can just make this pummel. Once I've made that pummel, depending on what he's doing at his upper body, I can go near side, I can go cross face, or I can start to go over the back here. When I go over the back, I'm going to start to bring my knees up into this square position, and I'm going to search for his foot down the base of his spine here. I always get a bicep scoop, not my forearm, it tends to be a lot weaker, but I go underneath with my bicep and hug onto his ass, and then I widen his knee towards the ceiling. Then I can start to claim that position with my knee, now that my hand's done that job, and then I can start to bring everything down to the side. Not everything down towards his hips, sorry. If I threaten that pummel and he's doing a good job by pulling his heel up towards here, no problem. I start to walk his hips down until his body's completely straight, which he doesn't really have a lot of offensive options from here. His legs are still completely squished together, and the only thing stopping me from freeing my right leg is just stepping up over the top here. Once I've done that, I can just swallow both of his knees at the same time. Yes, you would likely get put in 3/4 mount, but that's not the biggest deal in the world. So let's give that a go when we squish the knees together, whether their heels pointed towards your tailbone or not, and play with both options there. But the main consistent thing is just bearing weight on top of them with my near side hip that's closest to them, and making sure that my head is always over their far shoulder. And so even if I'm doing a really good job at the lower body, swishing knees together, if I take my head off his far shoulder, there's no weight on him, and I give up underhooks quite easily. He can start to bump me forwards and do a bunch of different things. Also, if I'm all the way over here, the likelihood that my left knee is in good position, exactly right, I get put into close guard. So if you guys just took two things away from this lesson, it's either we are opening the knees apart like this with the same body positioning as I'm closing the knees together with the same body positioning. Notice how I don't move, it's just whether his knee is open or closed, and my head maintains this posture the entire time. If that's all you took away from this, you would improve your passing. So let's look at what happens when he doesn't decide to go to Z-guard variations. What he might try and do is put a butterfly hook in, and I'll address this now. If he does manage to put a butterfly hook in because he bumps you away, all you're going to do is come off this right hand, find the front of his ankle, and just lightly replace it outside the front of his hip, outside the front of your hip. Do not catch his toes in your hip and then reef the fuck out of this, you will hurt their ankle or their knee, and it's not very nice. When you're maintaining good shoulder pressure, it's just a pop backwards of the hip. It's very subtle, and you won't actually put a lot of tension through their knee. So you'll be a decent training partner. So let's say that he starts to keep his knees wide and he doesn't want to go towards Z-guard variations. What's generally going to happen when you present a little bit of weight forwards over his torso is that he takes that knee out. Exactly right. Notice we're going back to the exact same position, whether we close the knees or this knee gets taken out completely. From here, you're in such a dominant position. If we want to get Spewer to hit a knee lever from here, he can't. If he wants to try and put a butterfly hook in, he can't. If he wants to try and put K-guard in, he can't. He wants to put me in close guard, he can't. Near side drag, far side drag, guillotine. There's no guillotine, like triangle.
Leg lock.
But you're starting to see, yeah, heel hook. Yalla, heel hook. But you're starting to see there's not a lot of offensive options for him whatsoever. And we are in one of the best positions in the sport, chest to chest half guard. That leads us to mount, it leads us to back takes, it leads us to exhibiting a lot of fatigue into our training partner. And me, I'm just chilling here. I'm not really doing a whole lot, to be fair. It's very efficient for me to be in this position. It's very difficult for him because he's going to flap around and struggle and trying to get to those things like we mentioned, just like the guillotine that's not available. And then we're just going to cruise through a guard pass right to chest half. So the most important thing, again, open the knees, crush the knees, head over the far shoulder. My hand is always roaming around here freely. David asked, he's like, what if I put my hand on the floor? Resist putting your limbs on the floor because now you're not putting weight into your training partner. If your limbs are always occupied by your partner, they're usually in a much better position. So from here, all I want to do is dominate the space between this knee and this shoulder. The easiest way to do this, as soon as this knee comes out, is I'm just going to shift my hips out towards this other side. So in full speed, what it'll look like, I do a really good job at weighing chest pressure over the top here. As soon as he takes that out, I shift across. Yes, this is a timing-based technique, but you know that if his knee's not coming down to be closed, it's likely going to go out the back door underneath your armpit, and you should be ready for that every single time. On the way, in this little transition, once he takes it out, you'll notice he's probably not too focused on what's going up here. So you can easily punch your fist into the middle of this gap. As you shift across, you will likely end up in a near side underhook. If he does a really good job at keeping his knees and elbows connected and he's balled up like this, he cannot possibly stop me from doing the same thing and cross-facing him at the same time. We end up in the universal starting position. Make a good effort to ensure that your knee is outside the line of his far hip. If it's not, and it's towards his tailbone, he can always knee lever me. It will at least, it won't always sweep me because my hand is available, but it will at least off balance me enough, maybe even potentially giving up a near side leg entanglement. We don't want to deal with that. We want to keep consistent pressure on top of our training partner at all times. So when we do make that adjustment, knee goes outside the line of his far hip. If he tries to knee lever me from here, my base is in a very good position. My left leg is elongated the entire way, and I'm still driving a ton of pressure into him at this stage. We're going to start to go into 3/4 mount by turning his chin away, getting my forehead down to the floor as I reach into his far lat with my middle finger, and then I'm going to try and get his leg down towards the floor. I'm going to start to use my forearm together with my knee popping up through the middle, and then as soon as I've made this adjustment, I want to start to face his body the other way to start to prevent him from using knee elbow escapes. If he does get an inside elbow, not to worry, his hand cannot stop me from cross facing him. So once I do that, I focus on my shoulder hitting the point of his chin, I reach into his far lat, and I start to turn him this direction, so it doesn't even matter if he gets the inside elbow. I just continue to lay his shoulders flat, and now I'm in a really good spot. He won't usually let my foot go from this stage, but we're in a much better position to start to reach for far side underhooks and then get our way into mount. He's not going to like this for very long, and so what usually is going to happen if he doesn't feel like he can bring his knee down and we can squish it together, he's going to take that knee out. Once he takes that knee out, we're always going to make an effort to circle our hips and walk our hips around towards his tailbone, of which when we do so, we'll likely end up in a crossface or a near side underhook. We go from near side underhook this time. When we get to this position, we're always making an effort to drive our knee outside the line of his tailbone so that if he tries to knee lever me, he can't. It also makes butterfly hooks very difficult. So from here, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to make sure that my left hip's the one that's got the most weight in it now. My left quad is actually starting to pull up underneath his ass. So if he tries to elevate me this way, I've got my near side underhook that prevents that, and I've got my left hip that prevents that. I'm going to search down with the blade of my forearm to where his knee is. I'm going to start to pop my knee forwards. And now because I've already got the underhook on the far side, I'm in a great position. I'm going to use this hand to start to go cross face this direction. I'm going to link up my hands together just outside, just above his shoulder line where his shoulder is. I'm going to start to plant my forehead down to the mat, free my last foot, and end up in mount. Let's give that a go.